Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Kapi Jana Vallabha Girbharadari Kapi Jana Vallabha Girbharadari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Nana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanacharim Jamuna Tira Vanacharim Jamuna Tira Vanacharim Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajika Acharya Dr. Sri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Founder Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Grantaraj Prabhupada lilamrta Ki His Holiness Sattvarup Das Goswami Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Guru and Gauranga. All glories to the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. Om Jnana Timirindasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chaksharam Malitam Jaina Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Jaina Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuttapadakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunath Anvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapte Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpa Tarobhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyahevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada lilamrta ki jai. So we're reading from chapter 8 of the volume 1. The chapter is called New Delhi, Crying Alone in the Wilderness. There is a little excerpt of a letter written by Mr. Rajendra Prasad, to India's president. I've got the clue of going back to Godhead just after leaving my present material body, and in order to take along with me all my contemporary men and women of the world, I have started my paper, Back to Godhead, as one of the means to the way. Please don't think of me as something wonderful or a madman when I say that I shall go back to Godhead. After leaving my present material body, it is quite possible for everyone and all of us. So this is Srila Prabhupada's letter to Mr. Rajendra Prasad. When Abai arrived in Mathura, he sought out Keshava Maharaj, who was now establishing his mat, and presented him with the deity of Lord Chaitanya. At Keshava Maharaj's request, Abai agreed to stay there, edit the Gaudiya Patrika. Abai was given a room, and for the first time, aside from brief visits, he lived in a mat with his godbrothers. As a senior experienced devotee, Abai held classes and instructed the brahmacharis, who were young, uneducated, and even illiterate, in the disciplines of devotional service and the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. He had only recently begun his duties when Bhakti Saranga Goswami, another sannyasi godbrother, asked Bhaktivedanta Prabhu to assist him in New Delhi at his ashram, Gaudiya Sangha. Both Keshava Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj Goswami recognized Abai as an accomplished writer and editor and wanted to work with him. It was accepted among Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples that A.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami was an expert preacher and writer, whether in English, Hindi, or Bengali. Now Keshava Maharaj wanted Abai to stay and work on the Gaudiya Patrika, while Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, who had to go to Bengal, was requesting him to come to Delhi to produce the harmonists, known in Hindi as Sajjana Toshani. Abai was agreeable to Bhakti Saranga Goswami's proposition, and Keshava Maharaj consented on the condition that Abai also continue to edit the Gaudiya Patrika, at least by mail. So we see that Abai, among all his godbrothers, he went to college, to Scottish Church College, a very elite college at that time for Indians. It was run by like a monastery style with all Christian-orientated teachers, lecturers. And when Prabhupada first met Bhaktisiddhanta, his guru-to-be, and the very first words Bhaktisiddhanta said, you are very educated, you are in the English language, and you must write books, print books, and preach and go abroad. So that was the message Bhaktisiddhanta gave to Prabhupada at the very first meeting. As an editor, Abai was in his element, and he was happy to preach in cooperation with his godbrothers. Although Abai didn't consider himself an accomplished scholar or author, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been pleased by his writings and encouraged him to continue. And now the senior sannyasis of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati were turning to him for help. They were practically competing to see who would get the benefit of his services. Perhaps Abai thought this should be his life's work, serving humbly under the direction of his godbrothers. So be mindful also, Prabhupada was a householder. At that time he still was with his family, and he was wearing white compared to all his godbrothers. They were sannyasis dressed in orange. But they were seeing him as senior to all of them. His ejection from Jhansi had been kind of a setback. At least it had left him temporarily unsure of how Krishna wanted to use him. But now his godbrothers seemed to be answering the questions. Living and working in an ashram with brahmacharis and sannyasis was a way of life. Abai had once considered it too austere, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had remarked, better you live outside your company. But now you would either have to struggle alone with nothing or stay within the shelter of a friendly portion of the Gaudiya Math. Perhaps he could carry out his desires to preach Krishna consciousness within the ashrams of his godbrothers. Since he would soon be the editor of Sajana Toshani, he began thinking of how to expand it. It was a scholarly Vaishnava journal, but cheaply produced and with a very limited circulation. He envisioned it surpassing India's slick illustrated weekly. It should be more popular than Time or Life magazine of America. Srila Prabhupada was very ambitious, even at that time. Life magazine or Time magazine was a worldwide global magazine. And he wanted also this, actually Back to Godhead magazine also, to be on the same par, or if not even better, bigger circulation. That was his desire. And why not? Krishna was no poor man. Abai thought of how he could start an ambitious subscription program by approaching the many prominent and wealthy men of New Delhi. Then by Krishna's grace, he would soon be able to print color photos and use high-quality paper for Sajana Toshani. He would give it his best effort, depending on Krishna. And while soliciting subscribers, he could take his book manuscripts and try to get them published. Dr. Alagappa in South India had wanted to publish his Gita Upanishad. No doubt, there were many men like him. Or perhaps Bhakti Anga Goswami would be willing to publish Abai's works with funds from the Gaudiya Sangha. Abai soon received a letter from Bhakti Anga Goswami's assistant, carefully instructing him how to travel to Delhi at the least expense. He was to travel by train third class to Delhi and from there to take a tanga. So you know the trains in India, if you traveled in India, the first class, second, third class was always packed to the brim. There was no sitting place. And just to save money, the Prabhupada would have to travel like that, to spare no expenses. And the tanga. The tanga was an old World War I, like a motorbike with an extended carrier. They still have them, I don't know. I still see them from Govardhan to Vrindavan. You can take those tangas. Since tangas at the station gate charged too much, Abai should first walk about 100 meters towards the right-hand side of the station, where he would find a cheaper one, where he had to ride alone, and he should pay no more than 1 rupee and 12 annas. Annas is a fraction of a rupee, I think. But he should try to share the tanga with another passenger, and that would be cheaper, keeping the crematorium to your left-hand side. The assistant instructed him, if you look towards the right, then you will be able to see our red flag and the signboard written in Hindi and English. When you reach there, we will pay for the tanga. At the Gaudiya Sangha, Abai found a disconcerting state of affairs. In the absence of their guru, Bhakti Saranga Goswami, the brahmacharis were quarreling and shirking their duties. And as a result, the preaching and donation gathering were being neglected. Cleanliness, deity worship, cooking, and even peace among the devotees were below standard. And like most of the maths of his god brothers, the Gaudiya Sangha was poor. Abai had come thinking he would be editing a magazine, but he found himself contending with a group of quarreling neophyte devotees. He learned that the brahmachari responsible for giving public lectures had not done any preaching. The devotees who had previously been holding kirtans in people's homes were now negligent, and the errand boy refused to run because he had lost his bicycle. Then a brahmachari handed Abai a letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami, requesting him to take up the general management of the mat. So this was the contents of the letter. Inspire everyone to be engaged in service. Otherwise, I do not know how we are going to print the English monthly magazine. Since we don't have much money in the fund, and since the brahmacharis are quite careless, Akinchana Maharaj wrote that he is unable to take the responsibility of the management. It will be very nice if you could keep your eyes on these affairs. And Abai found other obstacles in trying to produce Sajana Toshani, no typewriter, and bad relations with the printer. In a few days, Abai received another letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami, telling him what articles to print, cautioning him not to change essential elements in the magazine, and reminding him of his special duty. This is an excerpt of the letter again. I've asked Akinchana Maharaj to hand over the keys to my room to you so that you may use my room only for your office work. As you are there, you should try to maintain peace in the ashram for giving necessary instructions to one and all. Abai saw that he could do no editorial work until the laxity and petty quarreling in the ashram stopped. But when he tried to help, as Bhakti Saranga Goswami had directed, some of the devotees rebelled and even wrote to the spiritual master complaining. It was against many obstacles that Abai met the publisher's deadline from the August 1955 issue of Sajana Toshani. Yet owing to the printer's delay, the magazine did not come out until September. When at last the first copies were delivered, Abai sent several to Bhakti Saranga Goswami in Calcutta, asking for his response. Abai never heard from his godbrother directly, but received further instructions from Bhakti Saranga Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, who pointed out various mistakes in the issue, without mentioning whether Bhakti Saranga had been pleased with it. The errors were mostly technical matters of style. Abai had done the contents page in a different way, and had not printed Bhakti Saranga Goswami's name exactly as he had wanted on all his articles. Regarding Abai's request for a typewriter, Ramananda wrote that if the matters were distinctly written, there is no necessity for them being given to the printer in typewriting. Abai wrote to Bhakti Saranga Goswami requesting him to return to Delhi and establish a peaceful atmosphere in the mat. Regarding Sajana Toshani, Bhakti Saranga Goswami has suggested that the paper for the cover be improved and that the old magazine be done on a nicer paper by an up-to-date press. And Abai agreed, but improvements depended on money. The suggestion that the paper be printed from Calcutta is all right, but my suggestion is that either in Calcutta or in Delhi, we must have our own press with good equipment so that we may be able to broadcast the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all the important languages, especially in Hindi and in English. Hindi is meant for all India propaganda, while English is meant for worldwide propaganda. Abai further reported that since it was almost impossible to expect a printer to work speedily from handwritten manuscripts, he had already rented a typewriter. He also mentioned his ideas for increasing the number of subscribers. Abai's son, Brindaban, came to live with him for a few months at the Gaudiya Sangha. There was no question of Abai's returning to his family, and Brindaban simply associated with his father, following the routines of the mat and helping Abai in his duties. One day, a prominent advocate, the president of the Hindu Mahasabha, paid an unexpected visit to the Gaudiya Sangha. The mat was mostly deserted, and there was no prasadam on hand. So Abai and Brindaban received the prominent guest, cooking for him, offering him prasadam, and acquainting him with the activities of the Sangha. When Abai wasn't busy managing disorganized mat and working on Gaudiya Patrika and Sajana Toshani, he spent his time preparing a Hindi translation of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Although he was more accustomed to writing in English and Bengali, he reasoned that as long as he was preaching in Hindi-speaking areas, such a book would be important. Bhakti Saranga Goswami wrote that he wanted to print only 500 copies of Sajana Tosani for the September issue, but Abai wanted to print more. after making an agreement with the printer that the charges would be the same for 1,000 copies as for 500, he wrote Bhaktisaranga Goswami informing him of the good news. Abai also told him that he had recently secured a donation of printing paper and that he had arranged for a 1/4 reduction in the postal charges. So, Abai reasoned, why for the matter of saving some paper we shall not print the full number? In my opinion, we should print more than 1,000 copies every month and distribute them in large scales. But Bhaktisaranga replied through a brief postcard that they should print no more than 500. Abai continued his attempts to improve Sajjana Toshani. For him, it was not a perfunctory duty, but absorbing preaching. In a letter to Bhaktisaranga Goswami, he expressed anxiety over waiting for him to send articles for the next issue. Funds were scarce, so scarce that Abai had no decent dhoti, and yet he continued to envision a glorious future for Sajjana Toshani. Srila Prabhupada writes, I wish to see the paper just to the standard of Illustrated Weekly. Prabhupada was thinking big, with numerous pictures in order to make it very popular literature. For this, I wish to move myself to secure subscribers as well as advertisers. I wish to visit good businessmen, insurance companies, and government officers in this connection. But I have no proper dress at all. I wanted 2 sets of good dresses in order to keep this responsibility. And I shall be glad to have your decision on this matter. It is my heart's desire that this paper be improved to the highest elevation. So this is all very, very touching, isn't it? Compared now, 50, 60 years later, we in this wonderful facility, and we in such opulence. We should always think back how Prabhupada started. Be mindful of that. How he battled even to save a few rupees and not squander the wealth that's coming. Always be mindful of that. And to spend not lavishly but in a very intelligent way. Abai also requested that Bhaktisaranga Goswami help him publish his Hindi Chaitanya Charitamrita. Some non-Bengali gentlemen were demanding the book and had assured Abai that they would pay 25 rupees per volume. Abai requested a loan of 600 rupees under any arrangement suitable to Bhaktisaranga Goswami for publishing the first part of this work. Jai Sri Sri Radharanath ki, Sri Giriraj Govardhan ki, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari ki Jai. If this part is sold out, Abai wrote, the other parts will automatically come out. But just as life in the Gaudiya Sangha and work on the Sajjana Toshani under Bhaktisaranga Goswami's hand produced strain for Abai, Abai's ambition for increased circulation and his strong editorial opinions also created strain for Bhaktisaranga Goswami. In response to Abai's letter, Bhaktisaranga Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, wrote a letter full of flowery praises of Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, but with the intent of dismissing him from his position with the Gaudiya Sangha. So this is the contents. When innumerable humble obeisances at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava, Srimad Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, who received your letter written to Sri Guru Maharaj on 5/10/1955. Your project is very lofty and you are well-wisher of our society. We got to know that also. Since the last 2 months, in spite of so many difficulties, the difficulties of prasadam and misunderstanding of the devotees there, and in spite of various other difficulties, the kind of enthusiasm that you have shown, that is possible only for an elevated Vaishnava like yourself. You are a very favorite Vaishnava of Srila Prabhupada, and a friend of all the special associates of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is also referred to, Bhaktisiddhanta was also known as Prabhupada. So you are a favorite Vaishnava of Srila Prabhupada and a friend of all the special associates of Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees in Gaudiya Sangha's ashram in Delhi are new and less respectful. They cannot give proper respect to an advanced, elevated personality like yourself, especially the lofty speculations that you have. Our society, the present circumstances, has little ideas. We hope, with all your qualities, very soon you will become settled independently and fulfilling the desires of Srila Prabhupada, start preaching very widely. So in a very diplomatic way, they wanted to dismiss Prabhupada from the Gaudiya Math, and Prabhupada, I guess, had to move on. We are suspecting that it won't be possible for an able and respectable Vaishnava like yourself to stay there long, adjusting with the illiterate and less educated devotees of the Gaudiya Sangha in Delhi. Moreover, you are the head of the editorial board of Srimad Keshava Maharaj, Vedanta Samati's Gaudiya Patrika and Bhagavat Patrika. So if you spend much time in an ashram, then he might become annoyed. With many devotees, he is setting out to circumnavigate the land of Braj, and we are sure that he will need your assistance in this parikrama. So you consider all the pros and cons, that if you do not neglect the duty as a leader of his organization, he will be pleased. Some articles have been sent for the October issue, Sajana Toshani, and some more might be sent. We will be very much obliged if you would instruct Keshavananda Prabhu to publish the October issue. We hope that Sri Guru Maharaj will be able to personally publish the November and December issues. We wish to transfer it to Calcutta from the month of January. Sri Guru Maharaj has become old, and most of the time he has to depend on us. We are happy to know that you are trying very hard to publish the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Hindi. But in the present circumstance, it won't be possible for us to invest 600 rupees from our fund in order to print that, because Sri Guru Maharaj has taken up many projects on different directions now, and he has to spend a lot of money. So we can't take the responsibility of printing that book. Keshavananda Prabhu wrote that your clothes are getting torn. To buy a pair of clothes from the fund of the temple, and the devotees come with offenses at your lotus feet due to the short-sightedness, please forgive them. Signed, the servant of the servant, the Vaishnava, Sri Ramananda Das. It was not a fact that Abai was being called for leadership in Keshava Maharaj's parikrama. All it was a good excuse for Ramananda suggesting that Abai leave the Gaudiya Sangha. For after living as a dutiful member in the ashram of Keshava Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, Abai was again on his own. Without income or institutional shelter, Abai began staying in various homes in Delhi, living from week to week wherever he received an invitation. In terms of food, clothing, and shelter, these were the most difficult times he had ever gone through. Since his childhood, there had always been plenty of food and good clothes and no question of where he would live. He had been the pet child of his father, and he had received special guidance and affection from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But now Abai sometimes felt alone. Homeless, he moved around Delhi from one temporary residence to another, a Vishnu temple, a room in the Kapoor College of Commerce. But he was seeking donors, preaching from Bhagavad Gita, writing. His goal wasn't to find a permanent residence, but to print his transcendent literature and to establish or join forces with a pure, powerful movement for spreading Krishna consciousness. Abai made a list of several books he wanted to publish. 1. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in Hindi, 2,000 pages. Gita Upanishad in English, 1,200 pages. Science of Devotion in English, 300 pages. Lord Chaitanya's Samkirtan movement in English, 300 pages. 5. Message of Godhead in English, 300 pages. 6. Bhagavana Katha in Bengali, 50 pages. But to print he needed donors. He called on wealthy men in the offices and homes, presenting his manuscripts and explaining his mission. He had a list of donors, but few responded. And when he did not receive a donation, when he did receive a donation, it was usually only 5 or 10 rupees. Occasionally he would receive a letter of appreciation or endorsement. One appreciation came from Narayan Das Rai Bahadur, a retired executive engineer. and secretary of the Birla Mandi Trust, who had attended a public reading Abai had held in the presence of a popular guru. Mother Nanda Moyi, impressed by Abai's reading from his Hindi Chaitanya Charitamrita, Mother Nanda Moyi had donated 50 rupees and suggested that Abai also visit a well-known sadhu, Sri Hari Baba, who was lying ill in the hospital. Abai, accompanied by Narayan Das, had then visited Hari Baba, who had claimed that Abai's reading put him into ecstasy. Meanwhile, Narayan Das was becoming inclined to help, and in December he wrote a letter suggesting that everyone extend a helping hand for the successful publication of Sri A.C. Bhaktivedanta's various writings in Hindi, English, and Bengali. I wish him all success in his noble attempt. Abai would show this and other such letters to prospective supporters. In Delhi, it was not difficult to see government ministers, judges, lawyers, business executives, religious heads. There was always someone willing to hear seriously and occasionally to offer support. Thus Abai, with the 2 dhotis and kurtas the Gaudiya Sangha had supplied him, with his ability to preach and convince, but with little support and no fixed residence, continued his preaching undaunted. Writing and trying to publish was only half his effort. The other half was taking part in efforts for a world movement like the League of Devotees. Through Narayan Das, Abai inquired whether there might be a way he would do his work under the auspices of the Birla Mandir, one of the largest and richest temples in Delhi. Abai proposed that he be put in charge of propaganda in the English language, both within India and abroad. Since Narayan Das considered himself a follower of Sanatana Dharma, Abai wrote to him explaining how the teachings of Bhagavad Gita set forth the real Sanatana Dharma. Abai had many ideas about how Sanatana Dharma, as the eternal religion for all living beings, could be expanded and practically applied if Narayan Das would help him. Srila Prabhupada, I wanted to train up 10 educated youths to learn the science of transcendental knowledge and just prepare them for going to foreign countries for missionary work, to start immediately in English paper, or to receive my paper back to Godhead in the style of Illustrated Weekly of India, to organize a Sankirtan party, which shall not be only of good singers and musicians, but must also be used to practice sadhana or self-realization. So Prabhupada is very ambitious. Abai promised that as soon as he had done some groundwork, he, along with men and equipment, could start for foreign countries to propagate the missionary work. But he admitted also that he was externally in dire straits. Kindly do arrange for the above immediately and give me a proper place to live. I must remove from this temporary quarter by Monday next latest. The directors of the Birla Mandir did not take Abai up on his offer, but he thought of another way of engaging them. He would hold a public meeting at the Birla Mandir to help generate interest in the League of Devotees. He approached Sri R.N. Agarwal, president of the Delhi Municipal Committee, who, after hearing the names of several respectable people who would be attending, agreed to preside over the meeting. Abai set the date for December 22nd and printed 500 announcements and 200 invitation cards. Striking a cosmopolitan note, he stated in his announcement, "By the grace of the Almighty, Delhi is becoming the center of cultural association of the world. The leaders of both Russia and India had recently pointed to the need for cultural contact between all nations. But the highest culture," Abai suggested, "was scientific spiritual knowledge. Therefore, the best cultural resources in the world existed in India, and these resources, Abai stressed, should not be left to the organized sadhus and sannyasis, unorganized sadhus and sannyasis, but should be taken up by important members of society in an organized way." In December 22nd, Hindustan Times listed the meetings of the League of Devotees in the Today's Engagements column, along with announcements for meeting of the Rotary Club, the Tagore Society, the Indian Council of World Affairs, Bharat Scouts, and Indian Pharmaceutical Congress. The League's meeting began with a kirtan led by Professor Ed Chand, and then A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, explained his movement's objectives. Then Narayan Das spoke and afterwards read a number of proposed resolutions from the founder secretary, attesting that the persons present supported the League of Devotees and that they recommended that the central government of India also support it as a movement for world peace based on Gandhian principles. After adoption of the resolutions, the meeting closed with another kirtan and prasadam. The boy was convinced that if his well-wishers and fellow humanitarians would support him on a grand scale, he could create a movement for world peace based on the principles of devotional service to Lord Krishna. But his role was simply to present Krishna consciousness to whomever he could. The results were up to Krishna. Abai was aware that the good intentions of most of the participants in this Birla Mandir meetings could not go past that one meeting. But he wasn't discouraged. Through all his tireless evangelism, he maintained a philosophical jollity. In one sense, he was already fully satisfied. He was happy to be working on behalf of his spiritual master. So that was a momentum that was, although he was met with so much adversities, behind the whole momentum for Prabhupada was the instruction that was given to him in the first meeting. And that's what kept him going, in spite of all the adversities he was experiencing. Although he was changing addresses so far that his mail could hardly catch up to him, he wrote a newspaper ad for a home study course. And this is the excerpt of that under the heading Educational. Study the spiritual secret of Bhagavad Gita at home by correspondence and be a strong man. Full course fee, 50 rupees only. The instruction is imparted not in the ordinary imaginative way of qualified interpretations, but in the parampara system of perceptorial succession. All questions are properly solved. Apply A.C. Bhaktivinoda. Students of all communities and nationalities are welcome. So he placed his ad in the newspaper. He had not published Back to Godhead in 4 years, since 1952, but he decided to revive it. Back to Godhead was a mission worthy of his full attention, and he took all his efforts to collect the funds, compose articles, see to the printing, and then distribute 1,000 copies. The money he would raise by obtaining interviews and soliciting donations. One donor friend was Justice Bipin Chandra Misra, a Supreme Court judge in New Delhi. And this is what Justice Misra had to say. He used to come to me once a month. I gave him donations for his paper. It was only a 4-page magazine, but it showed his study of the subject and his earnestness and his devotion to Lord Krishna. He appeared to be a very simple man and modest. It was pleasant to talk to him. He had a smiling demeanor. The main thing was his humility. He would talk with affection and confidence, and he knew we were discussing things near to God. So every talk with him would sublimate us. It was a rather important personality at that time. I was a rather important personality at that time in religious affairs, but he would not be expected to make any contribution to the main religious life of Delhi at that time because of the language difficulty. Because his aim was to reach the English-educated persons, not the Hindi ones. And also because his means and popularity were not at all established. The magazine did not have a wide appeal amongst these people. Other religious leaders were all well established. The only thing that impressed me, and was worth noticing at the time, was the simplicity of his abiding faith in God's name and his mission. So this was Justice Misra's writing articles was no problem. By the grace of his spiritual master, he was neither short of ideas nor unable to set them down. Translating and commenting on the Vaishnava scriptures, his pen flowed freely. He was inspired by the miracle of the press, the Briyat Mridanga. The work of writing his message down and printing it 1,000 times, with awareness and urgency of speaking directly to everyone, not just people in Delhi or India, but everyone, put Abai into an ecstatic meditation. He would contemplate how copies of Back Together could reach thoughtful people who might read them gratefully. Nor was maintenance a problem. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Sukha Goswami had declared that a devotee's problem was not food, clothing, or shelter. If one had no bed, he would always lie on the ground and use his arms for a pillow. For clothes, he would always find some rejected garments in the street. For food, he would live on fruits from the trees. And for lodging, he would stay in the mountain caves. Nature supplies all necessities. A transcendentalist should not flatter materials to maintain himself. Of course, Abai wasn't living in the mountains or jungles, but in the city of New Delhi. Yet he had virtually adopted the renounced mode Sukadev had suggested, not to punish his body or prove himself pure and uncompromising, but because he had to live in poverty if he wanted to regularly produce back to Godhead. For Abai, it was a great labor of love, and purchasing paper for printing became a priority even before eating. Neglecting his personal needs for preaching was a manifestation of his faith in Krishna, of which Abai suffered no scarcity. He had full faith that if he served Krishna, he would be provided for. To work alone was not an insurmountable problem. It was pleasant and simple. It was better than having to manage the neophyte inmates of the Gaudiya Sangha. The ecstasy of working hard to serve his spiritual master was not a problem. The problem was the condition of the world. According to the Shastras, the correct age, Kali Yuga, would provide, the current age could create continual degradation in society. But Abai would see this evidenced every day in Delhi. Delhi, formerly known as Astanipur, had been the ancient capital of King Yudhishthira, who 5,000 years before, under the patronage of Lord Krishna, had been the most opulent king in the world, and whose citizens had been fully protected and provided for. Now, after 1,000 years of foreign subjugation, India was again independent, and New Delhi was the capital. Yet even in Abai's relatively brief 60 years of experience, he had seen Indian culture, in which in his childhood had retained much of the original purity of the Vedic age, degrade. Now he saw a society in which his countrymen were victimized by the propaganda that they could be happy in gross materialistic indulgence. The British had introduced tea, tobacco, meat, and factories, and now, even after independence, these were part of India's new way of life. Having driven away the British, the Indians were imitating Western ways, and India's leaders were deliberately ignoring the Vedic principles of God consciousness, the very treasures India was meant to distribute to the world, to the whole world. Abai had now seen India had abandoned his spiritual heritage and gone running after the modernization of the West. And now, where was that material advancement? Were Indians any happier in the independence than they had been in British days? To Abai, the overpopulated city was a hell of ruffians and fools. Although thousands of poor people were employed in the burgeoning steel mills and tire factories, their living conditions had worsened. Abai voiced his concern about these conditions in his Back to Godhead. Could the poor eat the mats and bowls produced in the factories? Could they be nourished by cinema, television, or sex songs on the radio? The leaders were unable to see that abandoning spiritual principles had led to the very hills they officially abhorred, a decadent, rebellious youth, corruption in every area of civic life, and even economic instability and scarcity. When Abai had been a youth in Calcutta, there had been no cinema billboards and advertising lurid sexual fantasies. But now India had developed the third largest movie industry in the world, and film advertisements were all over Delhi. Beef shops and liquor shops had sprung up. The newspapers regularly ran editorials deploring the degradation of young Indian boys who teased, insulted, and affronted women on the streets. Women's League complained about increased juvenile promiscuity and the obscene treatment of women in films and advertisements. There were no upright brahmanas or saintly administrators to do anything about it. Abai saw the need for a re-spiritualization of society. But society was rushing headlong in the opposite direction. In February, even as Abai was trying to establish his Bhakti Godhead, Prime Minister Nehru, while speaking with concern of India's crisis of the spirit, simultaneously launched another 5-year plan for rapid industrialization. Everyone from the Prime Minister down to the common man was concerned about the symptomatic problems, but no one seemed to understand that the real problem was the lack of God consciousness. Abai had to deliver the medicine for the hills of Kali Yuga. He knew it was needed on a much larger scale than he could reach on his own. But even to administer one issue back to Godhead was almost beyond his means. Writing the articles, typing them, taking them to the printer, and distributing them should not have been the work of one lone, impoverished devotee. But in working with the God brothers, he had met with their decided lack of organization and the lack of desire for vigorous preaching. Bhakti Saranga Goswami had seemed determined to keep Sajjana Tasani small, and his mutt, like so many others, had been ineffectual in attracting new members. This was the petty-mindedness that would cripple preaching. Therefore, he was now working alone on a small scale, happy in his spiritual welfare work, yet aware that his 4-page newspaper was only a drop of water in the desert. In February of 1956, while the United States was struggling with civil rights, while Khrushchev and Eisenhower were both openly deploring the arms race and were maneuvering in nuclear disarmament talks, and while the Shah of Iran was visiting New Delhi, Abai was trying to print Back to Godhead. In winter's discomfort, he walked through the early morning streets of Delhi to visit Surendra Kumar Jain, the printer, to read the latest proofs. By walking, he saved money. Only when he was delivering paper from the paper dealer to the printer would he rent a rickshaw. He had no chadar, only a lightweight cotton jacket, and he wore rubber shoes. He also wore a cotton hat that covered his ears and tied beneath his chin, protecting from the 40 degrees wintry mornings and the sometimes gusty winds. So Kumar Jain notes, my first impression was that he was a nice person and straightforward. I felt pity also because of the conditions under which he would come. I knew he didn't have even 25 paisa. He would come all the way on foot and without any breakfast or anything. He would come in the morning to the press, and when I would ask him, Swamiji, did you have anything to eat this morning? He would say, oh no, Mr. Jain, I just come because I had to see the proofs. That's all right, I would say. I will get breakfast for you. I would call for breakfast, and then he would sit and work. He would do this proofreading himself. The printing was done by me, and most of the time he would like to be present when the final printing was being done. He would come in the morning around 7 and stay until he had seen all the proofs. It was a regular thing that he would come without breakfast. I would arrange for breakfast, and he would sit across the table from one another for hours together. He was always talking on religious subjects only. But when we would be sitting, especially when waiting for the proofs to come, we would discuss many things. I felt that he knew quite a lot because he's a well-read person. He was more a friend than just a person coming to get things printed. He was a very simple man, straightforward in his habits, but his mission at that time was particularly to further the movement of Back to Godhead. His financial condition was very, very weak. Sometimes the printing would be difficult because he was not able to arrange for the paper. Many times I told him that if he was feeling difficulty, why was he continuing? But he said, no, it is my mission and I will always carry it on as far as possible. I tried to accommodate him to the maximum possible extent, but he was a real pauper. I only did the printing and he had to arrange for the paper. So sometimes it was delayed. Although my job was printing, sometimes I would say, all right, you are so keen, I will give you the paper. But I usually would arrange for it himself. Since we only did printing, he would bring it on a rickshaw. We were not uncomfortable together. But as business would have it, if the bulls were standing for a long time, they would ask him if he would do something about it. He would say, don't worry, you can be sure that your money is coming. I never asked him where his funds were coming from because I felt it was his personal matter. But it was embarrassing for him when he could not pay, so I never tried to embarrass him. He was concerned that if he didn't have money, how would he print the paper? And he definitely wanted to run that paper. He wanted to preach the teachings of the Gita. He thought of it as a sort of movement, that it was the only way that people in the world would find peace. His conviction was very strong. After picking up the copies from the printer, Abai would walk around the city selling them. He would take a seat at a tea stand, and when someone sat beside him, Abai would ask him, please, to take a copy of Back to Godhead. He also went to the homes and offices of people who had already donated or agreed to see him, and he sought out new contacts, sometimes on recommendation or sometimes by going uninvited, wherever he would find a potential reader. When he delivered copies to regular donors, he would discuss the previous issue's philosophy with them and sometimes write articles on topics they requested. Our esteemed friend, Sri Bishan Prasad Maheshwari, one of the learned advocates of the Supreme Court, has requested us to write something on the principles of fruitive action with special reference to vice and its potency. Often donors agreed to see him, not so much out of genuine interest or affection, as out of sense of obligation. In the traditional Hindu piety, they felt obliged to see the sadhu, take his paper, and even think well of him, but not necessarily to read his newspaper. Once when Abai was approaching a well-to-do house, the owner came into the second floor veranda and shouted, "Go away, we don't want you here." Abai, responding to the resistance, polite and impolite, that he met while selling Back to Godhead, wrote an article, "No Time, a Chronic Disease of the Common Man," for the March 16th edition. Should I go on? Stop. All right, we stop there. Page 187, the last page. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Prabhupada lilamrta ki jai. So, any comments or questions? We should give, reading this about Prabhupada started this Back to Godhead magazine should give us real impetus to spread this or get sponsorship or subscribers, isn't to increase. Because Prabhupada's dream or his desire was to make it even big as Time or Life magazine, worldwide, a global phenomena. And only way to fulfill that is to accomplish that desire for Srila Prabhupada. So we should all take this very seriously and carry on this wonderful work. Haribol.
Hare Krishna, Jaisacinandana Prabhu. I was just amazed in that Prabhupada was in, thin cotton jacket in like 4 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Fahrenheit weather, and we, tuck in very, very heavily when that kind of weather comes, even 10 degrees, 13 degrees. How can we imbibe, just a portion of Prabhupada's, lack of bodily concern and just that mood of wanting to preach without concern of the bodily necessities?
Yeah, it's a good question. And this stemmed from the time when Bhaktisiddhanta built this very opulent Gaudiya Math temple in what's that place? Bagh Bazaar, made of marble, and all the inmates became very attached. They came so attached to this place, and they were fighting for, possessions. And Bhaktisiddhanta at one time became so mad, he said, "Just sell this marble. Just sell. If you're fighting like this," he was very disturbed by it, and therefore he was only counting on Srila Prabhupada, to spread this movement. And we see today, even the Gaudiya Math, Prabhupada wanted to spread a global, he wanted to take this to another level. what the message of Bhaktisiddhanta was, or the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to go to every town and vigorously preach, not just be content to stay, like bhajana nandis and think of your own welfare or your own spiritual liberation. No, Prabhupada wanted the mood of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to give this message even to those who were not worthy of it. Therefore, he was so determined to carry out that message of Lord Chaitanya and Bhaktisiddhanta. Of course, the tendency to, we can become very attached to, spoiled, living in an opulent temple and having more than, I know when I joined, we had to buy, there was no dhotis, I had to buy, what do you call it, cloth from Popat Kara's. To buy cloth and use it as a dhoti. It was very, very... but then the tendency to accumulate, and the next month we're carrying cell phones, we're carrying satchels with iPhones, and anyway, if we can use it for preaching, that's good enough, but not just to carry all these things, to make a show how opulent we are. No, we should not give that impression. Because people will see like that and think, oh, you don't need any money. And whoever comes, we use it, intelligently. Prabhupada said we should not accumulate money. We should spend wisely and but be accountable for every cent, every farthing. Be accountable. That was his, and he showed by example. Also try to save wherever we can, isn't? And be mindful that everything is Krishna's energy. Prabhupada, was always mindful of that. That everything was Krishna's energy. He imbibed that. And then my Guru Maharaj Giriraj Swami, I think he developed a lot of Prabhupada's mood also. I was there with him, and one time we were on Parikrama, and we went, I think, Govardhan Hill. And before Govardhan Hill, there's a Haridev, the temple of Haridev, and everybody was bathing the deity, and you had to give to the Panda donations. And somebody gave to impress, I don't know what, they gave Guru Maharaj, my Guru Maharaj, 500 rupee. And Guru was haggling. He was actually haggling, he didn't want to give him the 500 rupees. He says, no, you take this, what you deserve. And even with the taxis, taking the rickshaw, he learned a lot of that. And also, he learned Prabhupada, whenever he got letters, he would use the same envelope and return, right? Yeah, he was so, frugal in that way to save everything. And yet, Giriraj Swami is the son of a millionaire. But he knew what Prabhupada, the value of money, yes. So we should really not be wasteful, and really see how the devotees, even how hard they work to establish this. Some of them sacrificed the spiritual life for this temple that we are living in. Yeah, they fell away just to bring money for this temple to complete it. So be mindful of that, and wasting prasadam, lavish, wasting of water, petrol for that Krishna's. So we should be very, very mindful. Hare Krishna.
Yes, on that mood, of becoming very entitled, it's very easy when we're in a temple like this. Like sometimes we're coming from Harinam or something late, and then I call and I ask for somebody to say prasadam, because we kind of just have this feeling of expectancy. Oh, I'm going on Harinam now. I should get prasadam when I come back. Which is important, but Raghunath, I just noticed Raghunath Prabhu.
No.
Doesn't.
Going on Harinam, you like the soldiers, and we're meant to facilitate that. Those are book distributors, especially during a marathon, we used to make nice packs. They're marching, so like the soldier marches on his stomach, The soldiers, you are spiritual warriors, and yeah, we should give first preference to those going on Harinam, those in the front line. We should really feed them nicely and make sure they're facilitated nicely, taken care of. And those who are should be mindful of that. That is a reciprocation between the management and that we're taking care of them. They're not just, being used. No. So that's the service of the cooks to keep us. Yes. Sometimes, we don't have breakfast, we go lunch. So it's the onus of the temple management to provide nicely. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki, ISKCON founder Srila Prabhupada ki jai.